I want to open today with some advice from a colleague of mine, the Reverend Sunshine Jeremiah Wolf, who was actually preached here at UUI many years ago. Sunshine, whose pronouns are je and jur, is a congregational life staff consultant with the Unitarian Universalist Association, serving the Central East region. Je offered this advice actually to ministers, but I think it is good advice for all of us. And this is what Reverend Sunshine had to say. Je began, "A confluence of events has come together to create a season of potential miscommunication, reactivity, and disconnection. The normal seasonal currents of grief during the holidays, colds, seasonal affective disorder, and family trauma have met with jets of quarantine, COVID, political foolishness, working too many hours, failing to take reasonable amounts of time off, and grief over recent deaths. She concludes this is creating unsuitable conditions for communication." So let's pause and unpack this a little bit. The holidays are hard. Winter is hard. Grief is amplified during the holidays. If you have recently lost a loved one, then you may still be in the grief phase of firsts. This may be your first Christmas, Hanukkah, solstice, or whatever holiday you may observe without your cherished loved one. And the firsts of grief are particularly hard. But any holiday, whether it's the 1st or the 15th, can amplify the grief of missing a loved one. So if you are feeling that especially acutely, it might be good to reach out. Maybe call a relative or a friend and share some of those memories. Or, reach out to your minister. Sometimes you use forget that that's a thing, but I promise it is. And I'd be happy to hear from you and hear your stories. So there's grief, but there's also just plain loneliness or isolation that people may feel at the holidays. And this year promises to be particularly isolating because we're not advised to travel or gather indoors. Families have a lot of difficult decisions to make because of this, and the holidays don't always bring out the best in intergenerational family dynamics. So as much as we love our extended families, sometimes they are also stressors during the holidays. Sometimes our relationships to our families are complicated and complex and may not fully support us, or may even reject us. And all of that comes up during the holidays. And what else? Seasonal affect disorder as the days get shorter and the nights get longer, economic stress, job stress, shopping and planning stress. It's all a lot on any given year. And Reverend Sunshine says, add to all these regular currents of holiday stress these new jets of quarantine, COVID, political foolishness, working too many hours, failing to take reasonable time off, and grief over recent deaths. And here's the consequence according to Reverend Sunshine. Expect higher chances of overwhelm, assumptions, heightened emotional response, and conflict for the next 3 to 6 weeks. End quote. Right? We are, to varying degrees as a people, stressed out, overloaded, worried, maybe angry, and not for no reason. All these things are piling on. And it's not that we can't deal, because we can. We are resilient, grounded, resourceful people. It's that conditions are ripe for us to be caught not at our very best. And that can open the door for reactivity, conflict, and regret in our interactions with our friends, our family, our partners, and our coworkers. So Reverend Sunshine has some advice for all of us. First, she says, quote, if you are feeling a strong reaction to something someone says or something you read in an email or online, take a beat. Remember that any emotions we are feeling right now are heightened. There is no hurry. Take 24 hours before you decide how to respond to anything that has you concerned and or upset. End quote. To which I add, maybe check in with someone you trust, just to get a perspective check. Second, Reverend Sunshine says, quote, if someone is proving challenging or you have a concern, assume that it was a miscommunication first. This is especially true with people who normally concern us or push our buttons. If we are not our optimal selves, you can be sure they are not. If it is someone you normally get along with, then really assume it is miscommunication. talk to them and get some clarification." End quote. To which I add, remember, everyone else is equally stressed, anxious, and or overwhelmed. If ever there were a time to assume good intentions or offer one another a little grace if things we say don't come out quite right, it is now. And finally, Reverend Sunshine advises, quote, "If you do not have to deal with it this month, don't. Urgency is a normal response to anxiety and overwhelm. It can also cause more harm than good." End quote. Now, this advice may fly in the face of our intuition or our upbringing. If we associate doing with virtue and not doing with procrastination, neglect, even laziness. But sometimes, truthfully, the most beautiful thing is to not do a thing, or at least to do it at the more propitious time. So truthfully, if you don't have to deal with it in the waning weeks of this year of our Lord 2020, maybe don't. And Reverend Sunshine concludes that while this perfect storm of stress is with us, quote, "breathe, take your time, and do not give a lot of power to first emotions and first impressions. Emotions and reactions are a sign that something matters, but they can mislead you on how or why it matters." End quote. So breathe, take your time, and if you can, set it down or set it aside for now. And one thing we should definitely set aside this holiday season are our own expectations. The holidays are generally a time of heightened expectations anyway. And in this season in which we are all being expected to set aside so many things, to give up or let go of so many things, traveling, dining out, singing together in church, hanging out with friends around the fireplace, going to the movies or the symphony or the museum, or heck, the roller rink or the bowling alley, shopping at the mall, or especially seeing our family. When we're asked to let go of so much, we may be tempted to hold on to those things that we can, especially tightly. And that's very natural. When we're feeling anxious or out of control in one sphere of life, we often grab at some other sphere where we can be in control. Our appearance, our household, our job, or parenting, at least where we think we can have control. And then we do our best to control that thing. And this is going to be a year in which habits and routines and traditions get disrupted. Many of us are going to be reinventing our December on the fly. Whatever we're doing, we've never done it quite this way before. And everyone around us is going to be navigating this uncertain terrain just like us. So it would not be unexpected for all of us to feel a little out of control. And so we are all at risk of becoming situational perfectionists, trying to control those things that we think that we can. And this is not a great anxiety management strategy because perfectionism does not diminish anxiety. It feeds it, creating a self-perpetuating loop. Now, perfectionism often begins with the self. We respond to anxiety by turning with some fierceness on ourself, on our body or our habits, or at this time of year, our failure to follow whatever blueprint for holiday magic we have internalized. And then we become the most unkind critic of ourselves. And the precise nature of the criticism often reflects not our own impossible standards, but someone else's. We can internalize an excessively critical voice of a parent, a partner, a boss, a religious teacher, or a composite voice we have shaped from our generally anxious culture and the impossible standards of marketing campaigns and other people's carefully curated Facebook posts. For younger people, I should explain that Facebook is kind of like Instagram, but your aunt is on there. So when you hear that inner critic begin making its barbed observations, it's always a good idea to stop and breathe and ask, whose voice even is this? How did it get here? And then I invite you to ask, is this the voice I want to companion me through these COVID times? Now, maybe it would be too much to ask the voice to just depart the premises, right? Our inner voices, our inner critics can be tenacious guests. But we could ask the voice, borrowing the wisdom of Reverend Sunshine Wolf, to just hold that thought until January, or maybe even the spring. You don't have to argue with the critical voice. You can just say to the voice, you are not a voice for COVID times. Certainly not a voice for December. Let's hear one another out in January, or possibly in the spring, and in the meantime, maybe there's another voice that would like to offer an opinion, a voice that might be willing to share a little kindness and a little compassion if it could be allowed to speak. If you can't silence the inner critic, try to calendar it. Hey, voice of my first boss out of high school, it's so great to hear from you. Let's talk again in January. I'm going to make a cup of cocoa and watch a Hallmark holiday special. You are welcome to join me if you promise not to interrupt. Now, seasonal holiday perfectionism may begin with the self, but sometimes when we are responding to anxiety with control, our attempted sphere of control extends beyond our own person and lands on the people around us. So we become excessively critical of our children, for example, or a coworker or a partner. We can develop opinions about all kinds of things. Are you really going to watch another Hallmark holiday special? And here I invite you to remember Reverend Hewitt's point from our reading today, that this is a time to permit people their simple joys, even the ones we don't understand. And then follow that up with Reverend Sunshine's advice. Whatever problem with the people around us that we need to address, take a breath, and if you can, put it off. Can this conversation wait until 2021? Possibly it can. Probably it can. Probably your partner's annoying habits will still be there in January of 2021. Probably your kids will still be leaving their dirty socks on the bookshelves in January of 2021. So ask yourself, is this a COVID times conversation? Or can this be a post-COVID conversation? Or at least a post-December confluence of all the things conversation? Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't ask for the things you need from the people around you, because we all need things, and we need to be able to ask for them. But at the same time, we all need compassion and grace and kindness, especially in the waning weeks of 2020. Imagine December is like a box, a cardboard box, and we're placing all of our expectations in the box. Now, each expectation is like a little snow globe, a small, self-contained, wind-up fantasy world where things happen just so, just like you'd expect and want, and it's nice. It's pleasant. It's what we need. It's what we want. Now, some of the other people in our lives, the people intimately in our lives, they're putting their expectations, their little snow globes, their vision of holiday happiness in the same box as us. Not just everyone gets to put a snow globe in our box, but some other people probably do. And if we're working, our boss might put like a brick in the box, and that's taking up some space. And this year, for a lot of reasons, it's a smaller box. There's less space for those snow globes, our own and everyone else's. And if we crowd the box with expectations, if we just pile in snow globes, pretty quickly we're going to run out of space. And these are delicate objects. They're fragile. We don't want them to break. And so they need some space around them, some cushion. Call that cushion a place for compassion and grace and kindness. We don't want to pack our expectations into our lives so tightly that there's no room for compassion and grace and kindness. And we don't want to crowd out wonder either. Like in For Our Time for All Ages story, like La Befana, who is so busy making everything just so that she misses out on the chance for something wonderful. She's so busy sweeping and straightening, she literally misses the parade. Well, in the story, La Befana is saved by a miracle, a star and an angel that lifts her above her mundane concerns and offers her another way of being. Flying as a metaphor for letting go of control, for trusting, for widening one's perspective and adopting a different vantage point. Our Universalist tradition says we are saved by love, which is its own kind of miracle. So I invite you to hold tight to love this holiday season and hold everything else loosely. Hold tight to love and hold everything else loosely. Let's leave plenty of open space in our lives for kindness and compassion. And then, despite everything else we have to let go of, we might just find that joy remains. Blessed be, and amen.